when Kurt Cobain stepped out of his Capitol Hill home on the morning of March 15, 1993, to grab coffee from his favorite neighborhood cafe. He never expected that a chance encounter with a frightened orange tabby cat would lead to one of the most touching experiences of his life. The small, clearly lost animal was huddled under his front porch, soaking wet from Seattle's persistent drizzle and obviously in distress. What happened over the next 3 days would reveal a side of Kurt that even his closest friends rarely saw. A gentle, determined man who was willing to drop everything in his life to help a helpless creature find its way home. But the most emotional part of this story wasn't Kurt's search for the cat's owner. It was what happened when he finally found them, and the letter he received afterward that moved him to tears. The reunion that Kurt orchestrated would teach him something profound about the impact of small acts of kindness, and show him that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life have nothing to do with fame, music, or success. They have everything to do with compassion and the connections we make with others, even strangers, when we choose to help rather than look away. But what Kurt discovered about the cat's story would break his heart before it healed it, and the owner's reaction to getting their beloved pet back would change Kurt's understanding of what it meant to use his time and resources for something that truly mattered. Kurt had always been drawn to animals, particularly cats, which he found comforting during his struggles with depression and the pressures of fame. There was something about their independence combined with their need for care that resonated with his own complex personality. Kurt had this incredible soft spot for animals, recalled his friend Dylan Carlson years later. He would stop everything if he saw a dog or cat that needed help. It didn't matter what else is going on in his life. If an animal was in trouble, Kurt made it his priority. On that particular March morning, Kurt was dealing with his own set of challenges. Nirvana was in the middle of recording In Utero, and the pressure from the record label to create another Nevermind was intensifying. Kurt had been having trouble sleeping and was feeling overwhelmed by the expectations surrounding the new album. Kurt was in a really stressful place during the In Utero recording sessions. Dave Grohl remembered. He was fighting with the label, struggling with the direction of the music, and in with a lot of personal issues. He needed something positive in his life. When Kurt first spotted the orange tabby under his porch, his immediate concern was for the animal's welfare. The cat was clearly not feral. It was well-groomed despite being wet, appeared to be a healthy weight, and showed signs of being accustomed to human contact. This wasn't a street cat, Kurt later told Courtney. Someone was missing this little guy and they were probably worried sick about him. Kurt approached the cat slowly, speaking in the soft, gentle voice he reserved for animals and small children. The tabby, despite being frightened, didn't run away, which confirmed Kurt's suspicion that this is someone's beloved pet. "Hey there, little guy," Kurt said as he crouched down near the porch. "You look lost. Let's see if we can figure out where you belong." The cat, who appeared to be male and probably around 2 years old, allowed Kurt to pick him up. As Kurt carried the animal inside, he could feel how thin the cat had become, suggesting he had been missing for several days without food. Kurt's first priority was getting the cat fed and warm. He opened a can of tuna and provided fresh water, which the hungry animal devoured immediately. While the cat ate, Kurt examined him for any identification tags or collar, but found none. The cat was obviously someone's pet, Kurt observed. He was litter-trained, knew how to eat from a bowl, and seemed comfortable being handled. But there was no way to identify his owner. Kurt spent the rest of that morning calling local animal shelters and veterinary offices to report finding the cat, hoping that someone had already filed a missing pet report. However, none of the organizations he contacted had received calls about a missing orange tabby matching the cat's description. Kurt was really methodical about trying to find the cat's owner. Courtney recalled. He made lists of places to call, organized his approach, and treated it like a serious mission. He was determined to reunite this cat with his family. When the official channels didn't produce results, Kurt decided to take a more direct approach. He created handwritten flyers with a description of the cat and his contact information, planning to post them throughout the Capitol Hill neighborhood. The flyers read, "Found, orange tabby cat, male, approximately 2 years old. Very friendly and well cared for. Obviously someone's beloved pet. Please call Kurt at, followed by his phone number. Kurt spent the afternoon of March 15th walking around his neighborhood, posting flyers on telephone poles, bulletin boards, and anywhere else that might catch the attention of the cat's owner. He covered a radius of about 10 blocks from his house, reasoning that the cat probably hadn't traveled too far from home. I saw Kurt putting up flyers that day, remembered neighbor Sarah Chen. I didn't realize who he was at first, but I was impressed by how thorough and careful he was being. He was clearly really concerned about this cat. That evening, Kurt received several phone calls from people who had seen his flyers, but none of them were the cat's owner. Some were people offering to adopt the cat if the owner couldn't be found, while others were simply calling to say they appreciated his efforts to help a lost animal. Kurt was touched by how many people called just to thank him for caring about a lost cat, Courtney observed. It reminded him that most people are fundamentally good and want to help when they can. The second day of Kurt's search began with more phone calls to expand his reach. He contacted radio stations, asking if they would mention the found cat during their morning shows. Several local stations agreed to help, broadcasting brief descriptions of the cat and Kurt's contact information. Kurt was willing to use his minor local celebrity status if it would help find the cat's owner, noted radio DJ Marcus Wilson, who worked at KXP at the time. He called our station personally and asked if we could help. Of course we said yes. Kurt also visited local pet stores and veterinary clinics in person, leaving flyers and asking staff to keep an eye out for anyone asking about a missing orange tabby. His persistence was starting to expand the search well beyond his immediate neighborhood. Kurt came into our clinic on Capitol Hill and left a flyer, recalled veterinary technician Jennifer Martinez. He seemed really invested in finding this cat's owner. You could tell it wasn't just a casual good deed for him. He genuinely cared about reuniting this animal with its family. On the afternoon of the second day, Kurt received a promising phone call. A woman named Margaret Williams called to say that her elderly mother, who lived about 15 blocks away, had been missing her orange tabby cat named Chester for 4 days. The woman sounded really hopeful, but also nervous, Kurt later recounted. She said her mother had been crying every day since Chester disappeared, and she wanted to make sure this was really her mom's cat before getting her hopes up. Kurt arranged to meet Margaret at his house, so she could see the cat and determine if it was indeed Chester. When Margaret arrived and saw the orange tabby, her reaction was immediate and emotional. "That's him," Margaret exclaimed, tears forming in her eyes. "That's definitely Chester." "Oh my God, Mom is going to be so happy." Kurt felt a wave of relief and satisfaction as he watched the reunion. The cat, who had been somewhat reserved during his stay at Kurt's house, immediately became animated and affectionate when he saw Margaret, clearly recognizing her. The cat's behavior changed completely when he saw Margaret, Kurt observed. He started purring and rubbing against her legs. There was no doubt this was his person. Margaret explained that Chester belonged to her 78-year-old mother, Dorothy Williams, who lived alone and considered the cat her closest companion. Chester had somehow gotten out of the house 4 days earlier, and Dorothy had been inconsolable since his disappearance. "My mother doesn't have many friends or family nearby," Margaret explained to Kurt. "Chester is really her only constant companion. She's been barely eating or sleeping since he went missing." Kurt was touched by the story and immediately offered to personally deliver Chester to Dorothy, thinking that the reunion would be more meaningful if it happened in the cat's familiar home environment. "I'd like to bring Chester home to your mother myself, if that's okay," Kurt told Margaret. "I think it would be special for her to have him return to his own space." Margaret was surprised by Kurt's offer, but gratefully accepted. She gave him Dorothy's address and called ahead to let her mother know that Chester had been found and would be coming home soon. The drive to Dorothy Williams' house took Kurt through neighborhoods of Seattle he rarely visited. As he traveled with Chester in a carrier borrowed from a local pet store, Kurt reflected on how this simple act of kindness had already enriched his own life in unexpected ways. "Helping Chester get home was giving me more satisfaction than anything I'd done in months," Kurt later told a close friend. "It reminded me that there are problems in the world that can actually be solved, and that felt really good." Dorothy Williams lived in a small, well-maintained house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. When Kurt knocked on her door, he could hear excited voices inside as Margaret prepared her mother for Chester's return. Dorothy opened the door with tears already streaming down her face. She was a small, elegant woman who was clearly overwhelmed with emotion at the prospect of being reunited with her beloved pet. "You found my Chester?" Dorothy asked Kurt, her voice trembling with hope and gratitude. "Yes, ma'am," Kurt replied gently. "And he's been very well behaved. I think he's ready to come home." When Kurt opened the carrier and Chester bounded out, the reunion was everything Kurt had hoped it would be. Dorothy immediately sank to her knees and gathered the cat into her arms, sobbing with relief and joy. "Chester, oh Chester, I was so scared I'd lost you forever," Dorothy whispered into the cat's fur as he purred loudly and nuzzled against her face. Kurt watched the reunion with his own eyes filling with tears. The pure love and relief in Dorothy's reaction reminded him of the powerful bonds that exist between people and their pets, and the devastating impact that losing a beloved animal can have. Watching Dorothy and Chester reunite was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, Kurt later reflected. The love between them was so pure and uncomplicated. It was exactly the kind of positive experience I needed in my life at that time. Dorothy insisted that Kurt stay for tea, so she could properly thank him for his efforts. Over the next hour, she shared stories about Chester and her life, painting a picture of someone who had found great comfort and companionship in her relationship with her cat. "Chester came to me 2 years ago after my husband passed away," Dorothy explained to Kurt. "He's been my constant companion through some of the loneliest times of my life. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost him permanently." Kurt was deeply moved by Dorothy's story and impressed by her resilience and positive attitude despite her circumstances. Their conversation reminded him that meaningful connections and sources of joy could be found in the simplest relationships. "Dorothy was such a lovely person," Kurt later told Courtney. "She had this amazing ability to find happiness in small things. Her cat, her garden, her books. I felt like I learned something important from her about what really matters in life." When Kurt finally prepared to leave, Dorothy walked him to the door and took his hands in hers. "I can never thank you enough for bringing Chester home to me," she said, tears again flowing down her cheeks. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Kurt was touched by her gratitude, but he also felt that the experience had been rewarding for him as well. Helping Dorothy and Chester reunite had provided him with a sense of purpose and accomplishment that had been missing from his life for months. "It was my pleasure, Dorothy," Kurt replied. "Taking care of Chester and getting him back to you has been the highlight of my week. Thank you for letting me be part of your reunion." 3 days later, Kurt received a handwritten letter in his mailbox that would become one of his most treasured possessions. The envelope was addressed in careful, old-fashioned cursive writing, and inside was a heartfelt thank you note from Dorothy Williams. The letter read, "Dear Kurt, I hope you don't mind that I learned your full name from Margaret. I wanted to write to you properly to express my gratitude for bringing Chester home to me. In my 78 years, I have rarely encountered such kindness from a stranger. You took time out of your busy life to care for my cat and make sure he got home safely, and I will never forget that generosity. Chester is doing wonderfully and seems to have enjoyed his adventure, though I think we're both happy he's home where he belongs. I've been thinking about our conversation and how you mentioned that you sometimes feel overwhelmed by the problems in the world. I want you to know that you solved the most important problem in my world when you brought Chester back to me. Sometimes I think we forget that small acts of kindness can have enormous impact. You changed my life with your compassion, and I hope you remember that the next time you're feeling discouraged, the world is a better place because you're in it. With all my love and gratitude, Dorothy Williams. P.S. Chester purrs extra loudly now when I read him stories, and I like to think he's telling me about the nice man who took such good care of him." When Kurt finished reading Dorothy's letter, he was openly crying. The sincerity and warmth of her words, combined with her perspective on the impact of his actions, moved him more than any fan letter or review he had ever received. "I've never gotten a letter that affected me like Dorothy's did," Kurt told Dylan Carlson while showing him the handwritten note. "She made me realize that the most meaningful things I can do with my life, might have nothing to do with music or fame. Kurt kept Dorothy's letter in his wallet and would often read it during difficult periods when he was struggling with depression or feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of his career. Her words served as a reminder that simple acts of kindness could have profound impact. That letter from Dorothy became like a touchstone for Kurt, Courtney observed. Whenever he was feeling down about himself or questioning whether anything he did mattered, he would read her words about how he had changed her life by helping Chester. The experience with Chester and Dorothy also influenced Kurt's approach to other opportunities for kindness in his daily life. Friends and family noticed that he became more attentive to small ways he could help people, whether it was carrying groceries for an elderly neighbor or giving directions to lost tourists. Finding Chester and reuniting him with Dorothy changed something in Kurt, Dave Grohl observed. He seemed to realize that he didn't need to solve world hunger or end all suffering to make a meaningful difference. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is help one person or one animal in need. Kurt also began volunteering at local animal shelters when his schedule permitted, inspired by his experience with Chester and his desire to help more lost or abandoned animals find homes. Kurt started showing up at our shelter about once a month, recalled volunteer coordinator Lisa Park. He would help with feeding, cleaning, and socializing the cats. He was particularly good with the shy or traumatized animals. He had this gentle way of connecting with them. The story of Kurt's search for Chester's owner remained largely private during his lifetime, shared only with close friends and family. However, word eventually spread through Seattle's music community about Kurt's 3-day mission to reunite a lost cat with its elderly owner. The Chester story became kind of legendary among people who knew Kurt, noted music journalist Charles Cross. It perfectly illustrated his character. This famous rock star dropping everything to help a lost cat find its way home. It showed the kind of person he really was underneath the public persona. After Kurt's death, Dorothy Williams was devastated to learn that the kind stranger who had helped her had been the famous musician she had been reading about in the newspaper. Margaret contacted Courtney to share her mother's condolences and to let her know how much Kurt's kindness had meant to their family. When Mom found out that Kurt was the musician who had died, she was heartbroken, Margaret later recalled. She had no idea during their conversation that he was famous. To her, he was just a wonderfully kind young man who had gone out of his way to help her and Chester. Dorothy lived for several more years after Kurt's death, and she often told friends and neighbors about the kind stranger who had brought Chester home. Her story became part of Kurt's legacy in ways that few people knew about. Dorothy would tell anyone who would listen about the angel who found her cat. Margaret remembered. She never forgot Kurt's kindness, and she made sure everyone knew what a good person he had been. Chester lived to be 15 years old, spending his final years as Dorothy's constant companion. After both Dorothy and Chester had passed away, Margaret found Kurt's original found cat flyer among her mother's treasured possessions, carefully preserved along with photos and other mementos.
Mom kept that flyer for the rest of her life, Margaret noted. It represented one of the happiest days she'd experienced after Dad died. Kurt's kindness gave her several more years of joy with Chester. The Chester rescue story has become part of the broader narrative about Kurt Cobain's character, illustrating the compassionate side of his personality that was often overshadowed by discussions of his struggles with fame and addiction. The story of Kurt and Chester shows us who Kurt really was at his core, observed music historian Gillian Garr. He was someone who would literally drop everything to help a creature in need, whether it was a lost cat, or a homeless teenager or a sick child. That compassion was fundamental to who he was as a person. For those who knew Kurt personally, the Chester story exemplified the qualities that made him such a beloved friend and family member: his empathy, his determination to help others, and his ability to find meaning in simple steps of kindness. Kurt didn't help Chester because he thought anyone would notice or care, Dylan Carlson reflected. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and because he couldn't stand the thought of Dorothy Williams crying every night for her lost cat. That's the Kurt I want people to remember. The handwritten letter from Dorothy Williams remained one of Kurt's most treasured possessions until his death. After he was gone, Courtney had the letter framed and displayed in their home as a reminder of the positive impact Kurt had on individual lives
through his simple acts of kindness. That letter from Dorothy represents everything beautiful about Kurt's character, Courtney said years later. It shows how much joy he could bring to someone's life, just by being compassionate and caring. I read it whenever I want to remember what made Kurt special. Today, the story of Kurt Cobain's 3-day search for Chester's owner serves as a reminder that the most meaningful acts of kindness often happen away from public attention, motivated not by recognition, but by genuine gersion for others. The reunion of Chester and Dorothy Williams, facilitated by a famous rock star who cared more about an elderly woman's happiness than his own busy schedule, demonstrates that true character is revealed not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of compassion. Kurt's willingness to spend 3 days searching for a cat's owner, and the profound impact that Dorothy's thank you letter had on his own life, illustrates the reciprocal nature of kindness, how helping others often enriches our own lives in unexpected ways. The orange tabby cat, who wandered onto Kurt Cobain's porch one rainy March morning, became the catalyst for one of the most touching stories in the musician's life, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can create the most lasting memories and meaningful connections. If this heartwarming story of Kurt's kindness moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that small acts of compassion can change lives. Have you ever helped a lost pet find its way home, or been touched by a stranger's kindness? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the beautiful moments of humanity behind music's greatest legend.